So this morning and early afternoon, we were focused on a variety. We had a nascent Wyoming energy industry and a traditional Wyoming energy industry. And our next one is focused on another nascent industry that leverages Wyoming geology and expertise. And that's at looking at rare earth elements and critical minerals. This could potentially be a new industry for Wyoming that could lead to substantial economic development, benefit the entire country, improve supply chain, improve national security, and quite frankly, be something that students are really interested in. I have two students. I have students working on oil and gas problems. I have two students working on problems with rare earth elements, and a new student who wants to work on more of the same. And actually, I have a former student in the crowd, Garrett, who worked on rare earth elements and uranium roll fronts, and he's now working for a nanotech firm in upstate New York. So that's all really important, and that's the focus, rare earth elements, critical minerals, the focus of our next panel. And this panel is chaired by Dr. Erin Campbell, who is the director of the Wyoming State Geological Survey. I might add, the first woman director in Wyoming history of the state survey. Erin has been a colleague for many, many years, and more than that, she's been a good friend. So join me in thanking and welcoming Erin to moderate our panel. Erin.
Thank you, John. Well, good afternoon and welcome to the third panel of the day. And I would like to start by thanking the SER staff for giving us this time slot, which is clearly the best one. It's not right after lunch when you're feeling drowsy. And the next panel will be right before the poster session and the beer. So we are in the perfect time slot. I'm honored to be moderating this session today on rare earth element and critical minerals, opportunities and challenges for building a new industry in Wyoming. We have a truly well-rounded panel today. From industry, we have Randy Scott, who has extensive experience in mining and is currently CEO and Director of Rare Element Resources. From the area of academics, we do not in fact have Aaron Phillips. We have Fred McLaughlin, who is the director of the Center for Economic Geology Research at the UW School of Energy. And so that makes me the only Aaron up here today. We also have an expert in policy, environment, and societal aspects, which is Jada Garofalo, who specializes in environmental policy and governance at ABT Associates. And then from the corner of government, that would be myself from the Wyoming State Geological Survey. But before the panelists introduce themselves more fully, I'd like to answer one question I've heard about this session. And that is, why is there a critical minerals and rare earth elements session in an energy symposium? So to start answering that, let's look at the definition of critical minerals. And when I say critical minerals, I'm including rare earth elements under that category. So critical minerals are minerals, elements, or materials essential to economic and national security. They serve essential functions in manufacturing of products, and they have supply chains that are vulnerable to disruption. Generally, this is because we have insufficient or no domestic sources for these critical minerals. And that's where energy comes in. Critical minerals and rare earth elements are crucial for green energy technology. Every form of energy has a cost, and green energy technology currently costs much more in terms of minerals than fossil fuels. For example, an electric car requires 6 times the mineral input of a conventional car. A wind plant requires about 9 times the mineral input of an energy equivalent gas-fired power plant. So in order to develop a broad, diverse energy portfolio and not be as reliant on potentially unstable sources of critical minerals and rare earth elements, we need to develop our domestic resources. And if we develop them carefully, intentionally, and not as a frantic reaction to a sudden lack of supply, we have the best chance of maintaining the strong environmental standards we have in the United States, as well as protecting the safety of the workers and protecting land and wildlife that we value so highly in Wyoming. Developing that mineral resources requires locating them, and that's where the Geologic Survey and the School of Energy Resources comes in. Siting, permitting them, and dealing with public relations, and that's where Jada will illuminate us. And then the mining and processing, and that's where Randy will have the experience and expertise to share with us. So with that, I will start by describing a little bit about what the Wyoming State Geologic Survey is doing in terms of critical minerals. The role of the Geologic Survey in the state is to study and report on energy and mineral resources, geologic hazards, fossils, and water issues for the benefit of Wyoming's residents. In terms of critical minerals, we are focusing on traditional mineral systems, generally hard rock ore deposits or heavy mineral sands. We're working on geochemical sampling in the Laramie Range, Medicine Bow Mountains, Sierra Madres. We're looking at the Phosphoria Formation across the state and heavy mineral sands across the state. We've done a little bit of work on Kemmerer coal underclays and inner beds, which was complementary to the work that SER is doing. And SER is tackling more of the unconventional types of deposits. A very exciting development is that we're coordinating with the USGS to conduct $3.8 million in airborne geophysical surveys that are funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and state ARPA funds, with huge thanks to the governor and the state legislature for allocating those funds. We'll be flying over the Medicine Bow Mountains, the Sierra Madre Mountains, and conducting a large survey over South Pass and the Granite Mountains. We'll be looking at magnetics and radioactive signatures of those rocks. And much of that work will be conducted next summer and available to the public. These airborne geophysical surveys can see through the trees, they can see through the overburden, and we can track our mineralization trends. If we identify an ore deposit in one location, we can have a better idea as to where to find it by following that geophysical signature that we've identified from the airborne survey. And we hope that this preliminary work will attract further exploration by industry. Although I could talk about the geology extensively, I will now turn it over to the panelists who will give an introduction of themselves and the work that they are doing on critical minerals. Randy.
Are we on? Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Wold. I'm sorry. There we go. Hello? There we are. Okay. I'd like to thank the Wold Foundation and the School of Energy Resources for the kind invitation to join this conference. As Aaron pointed out, I know now why we've been invited to this as a rare element company and not necessarily an energy company. And I think it's interesting how these facts are all coming together as we move forward into the future. Rare element resources has been in the state of Wyoming for over a decade now. We explored, delineated critical rare earth project, the Bear Lodge Critical Rare Earth Project located up in near Sundance and Upton. We've spent a lot of money and a lot of time developing technology to further separate those critical rare earth elements into their individual constituents, specifically for permanent magnets, which are essential to the electric vehicle industry. They're essential to the wind turbine industry. They're essential to launching jets off of aircraft carriers and all sorts of other applications. And everybody knows about the little rare earth magnets that are in your cell phone. But we have rare element resources has been, our DNA has been to be a relatively quiet company over these 10 years. We don't, as a small natural resource company, we don't liken to putting out a press release every week or two or three, touting our resource or touting our, thanking the government for some new policy that has recently come out. We instead have always felt that it was important to talk about the things that were important. So when we made progress, we wanted to make sure that the people in Wyoming and the rest of the world knew about what the progress we were making. So the point I want to make here as part of this introduction is that Rare Element Resources has made a lot of progress over the last 3 to 5 years. There have been a lot of changes, a lot of successes, and we're moving forward with what we think is one of the most exciting aspects in the history of the company, with the development of a $44 million demonstration plant in Upton, Wyoming, to separate rare earths, with the help of the Department of Energy, who provided us with a $22 million grant. And I'd be happy to talk about that some more when we get some questions.
Thank you. Fred.
Thank you, Aaron, and I'd like to thank you for having me here, even if you had no other choice in the option. So my name is Fred McLaughlin. I'm filling in for Dr. Erin Phillips. She sends her regards. She's a colleague of mine at the Center for Economic Geology Research at SER, and she leads our critical minerals program for our division. We've been working in REEs and critical minerals for 6 or 7 years now. We started with some state funding to look at coal byproducts. So the idea back in the day was, can Wyoming benefit from looking at value-added resources to existing industry? So we started there with the geochemical assessment, and we're pleasantly surprised. As a geologist, trained geologist, I thought that there was very little hope for value-added prospect from some of these coal deposits, and what we found told us differently. This early funding allowed us to go after some projects, mostly with federal support, the DOE, and I'll mention a couple of them quickly, and I'll hand to Jada here. So one of the neat projects we're currently working on is called the TCF, or Technology Commercialization Fund. It's a direct collaborative effort with NETL, National Energy Technology Labs. We are doing the resource assessment at SCR, and they are providing some of the extraction technologies for PRB coals. This project has advanced so much that they're going to set up a pilot scale lab in Gillette at the Wyoming Innovation Center to start testing their patented extraction processes on Wyoming coal byproducts. That's one of them. A couple other things, and I do have notes from Aaron, so this is also what Aaron is allowing me to share with you all. We've done previous studies on REs and other conventional resources like produced waters, uranium roll fronts, which I think Aaron mentioned, which are very interesting geologic deposits. But two of our big programs right now are called Core CM projects, and Core CM are DOE funded projects that stand for carbon ore, rare earth, and critical minerals. They're basin focused projects. So Wyoming has two of them, one of the only entities that were awarded two of these projects. So one's located in the Potter River Basin, and one's located in the Greater Green and Wind River Basin. And these are kind of first order studies. Initially, they're supposed to be phased with the goal of evaluating different rare earth or critical mineral resources and technologies and workforce assets and existing transportation aspects. So they're very neat projects with respect to a holistic look at trying to develop RE industries in Wyoming. We have partners such as Randy and his company. So with that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker.
Thank you, Fred. Jada.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and it's an honor to participate in this panel today. My name is Jada Garofalo. I am a climate science and policy expert and an attorney by training from the University of Wyoming, for those of you who also hail from the University of Wyoming Law School. I have over 10 years of professional experience in the climate and environmental policy sort of arena. I'm currently working for Apt Associates, which is a government consulting firm, providing regulatory analysis, technical assistance, program and project management services to agency and also state clients. My professional focus was initially on climate impacts, for instance, to health, but then I've turned more recently to adaptation and mitigation efforts, more specifically in the energy sector. And I previously worked for the School of Energy Resources and conducted an assessment, a regulatory assessment on rare earth elements and critical minerals and sort of the policy landscape that exists at the moment and what we see changing. So I'm hoping today to talk to you about those items and provide maybe a more full discussion on those topics.
Thank you so much. So what we'll do now is we have a few questions for the panelists, and I will direct the question to someone specifically, but if anyone else would like to add to the answer, please don't hesitate to chime in. After we go through some questions, we will be taking questions from the audience. So please hand your questions to the student assistants, and Holly will bring them up to me as well. So I'd like to start off with you, Randy, if you don't mind. I wanted to hear a little bit more about why you are focusing on Wyoming for a project, and if you could give us an update on the current state of that project.
Sure, happy to do that. We're focused in Wyoming because that's where we found the rare earth deposit. And that's usually the way miners and explorers do it. But to be honest with you, we couldn't have picked a better place. I mean, our project up in northeastern Wyoming is surrounded by infrastructure. It's got great people. It's an ideal place to develop a project like ours. In fact, when we talk about the Bear Lodge project globally, we always tell everybody about the competitive advantages that we have as a resource company and a development company. And the most important one we talk about is that we're located in the state of Wyoming. So it's serendipitous that we find rare earths in Wyoming. Maybe. Are we happy? You darn right we are. We're very happy about that. So let me tell you a little bit about the project. I'll just give you a quick context. 10 years, 11 years ago, it was discovered by one of our founding directors. I came on about 11 years ago, and it's been quite a ride over those 11 years. As a small natural resource development company, we have suffered all the ups and downs that you would expect from a small resource company, including a market that has been essentially controlled by the Chinese. Our project made good progress for 3 or 4 years, actually worked diligently on the permitting side, as well as to further delineate the resource. The resource kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger. So we stopped drilling in 2014. It didn't need to be any bigger. It was already 20, 30, 40-year mine life, but we know that the resource is even bigger than that. So we were working on permitting at that time, and we were working on developing processing technology to recover the rare earth elements. And that activity went through fits and starts as the market changed on us, and we were able to surprise ourselves with some of our technology and decided that instead of producing a combined rare earth concentrate, we were going to produce separated rare earth elements. And at that time, and still today, there aren't very many places in the world where that's done, and China controls that processing activity to the tune of 85 to 90% right now. So we still have the issue of having to deal with that, but from a safe, secure domestic supply, we decided that we were going to produce these separated rare earths. At the time, we achieved a draft environmental impact statement, a major accomplishment for any small resource company. And then the second thing that happened to us was we ran out of money. So that was back in 2014, 2015, the market turned down quite dramatically for equity offerings in the natural resource space, but particularly in the rare earth space, as China was playing with the market again and dropped rare earth prices globally. So we had a choice. We decided that we were going to hunker down and try to survive for a period of time until we thought the market would turn and things would get better for us. That happened, but in the interim, we decided that we needed to find a strategic investor to come in and not just provide us with funds, but would provide us with technology, access to markets, et cetera, et cetera. And we were very fortunate in 2017 when we signed a deal to bring a company called General Atomics as an investor in rare element resources. If you don't know General Atomics is, we think, the largest private defense contractor in the United States. They're out of San Diego. They build the Predator. They build technology projects all over the world. And I think that not only were they interested in our resource, but they were also interested in some of the technology that we had developed for processing. So As a result of that, they began their investment in rare element resources, and they now own 54.7% of rare element resources. In the interim, we have done a couple of different pilot plant tests with an affiliate of General Atomics over in Dresden, Germany, where we progressed our proprietary technology to even further enhanced capability. And that technology now has been, it has been decided that that technology will be the technology for the demonstration plant that will be built in Upton. Back in 2021, along with General Atomics assistance, we made proposal to the Department of Energy to build that demonstration plant. And in October 1st of 2021, we were awarded the $22 million grant. The Department of Energy is essentially a partner with General Atomics and Rare Element Resources to build that plant. DOE is providing $22 million. The industrial partners, Rare Element Resources specifically, had the responsibility for coming up with the additional $22 million. On the back of those positive announcements, we were able to do a rights offering and raise another $22 million by the end of 2021. And the project is off and running now. It's 3 years. The first year essentially is in the design and engineering. The second year is in the procurement and construction. And the third year, 6 to 12 months, will be in the actual operations of the demonstration plant with an eye forward to making a decision on the commercial operation. So that's a quick, not very quick.
Wonderful, thank you. Jada, I was wondering if I could ask you if you can tell us more about the policy and regulatory issues related to building a rare earth element industry in Wyoming.
Yes, I definitely can. So I think about this in sort of two big categories. The first being that there's a burdensome regulatory framework for critical minerals generally. And the second being that there's sort of an unclear regulatory framework for unconventionally sourced critical minerals. So on the first category, the burdensome regulatory framework, the governor mentioned this a little bit, and so did the oil and gas panel panelists. But when conventionally sourced critical minerals are being mined, you have either mining laws from state lands or from federal lands that will apply. And so from the state perspective, you might have Wyoming statutes and the Board of Land Commissioners involved in that mining process. From federal land mining activities, which is important because Wyoming has 48%, nearly half of its lands are federal, you have the federal landscape for mineral development, which is their minerals are classified into either locatable, leasable, or saleable. And critical minerals generally fall under the locatable category. And that is the general mining law of 1872, which some do say is fairly antiquated. So that law would apply. And then you also might have a host of other federal level environmental laws like NEPA, which I think from 2012 to 2019 on average took 3.7 years to complete. You might also have RCRA, which is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which governs the hazardous release of toxic materials into the environment and provides for management so that doesn't happen. Actually most milling, mining, and smelting solid wastes are actually exempted from RCRA, which leaves to states the obligation to govern how they're going to deal with hazardous release of materials. So then you're going back to state regulations, of which Wyoming has different siting, environmental and hazardous materials, taxation, and reclamation rules and laws that apply. So in summary, burdensome regulatory process, hard to track what needs to happen when. On the second part of that answer, the unclear regulatory framework for unconventionally sourced critical minerals, which we've learned are secondary sourced or waste products, recycled sources or byproducts. The challenge is how to regulate those unconventionally sourced critical minerals because they don't fall under the mineral classification of federal law. They're not necessarily locatable. They're not necessarily leasable, and they're not necessarily saleable. So some of them might fall under RCRA, which is subtitle D, the non-hazardous solid wastes under the coal combustion residuals, regulations, but some are exempted from RCRA. And so that leaves a lot to the states to figure out in terms of how are we going to regulate the mining of these unconventional, the sourcing, of these critical minerals that are unconventionally sourced. So a lot of that remains unclear. I think those are the two main problems.
Great, thank you. Fred, has SER done any research on what it might mean to the state in terms of economic development if we are able to stand up a rare earth element industry in Wyoming?
That's a great question. And we have to some degree. So I'll be happy to share what I know and also what Aaron told me to say. So we have studied this, of course, is Dr. Krutko says our director. You know, our job at SER is energy driven economic development for the state of Wyoming. So a lot of the RER stuff that we worked on is commercially focused. And that, of course, includes what are the impact to workforce and other taxation pieces of Wyoming state framework. So one of the things we do believe that would come is new specialized jobs potentially to be associated with these mining extraction industries and hopefully even all the way up to upstream. We're early into that in some of our programs, Dr. Campbell, so we're trying to figure that out a little bit more. We also think that our colleges could go around it. So these new energy critical mineral industries are going to need new training. They're going to need new specialized workforce. So we're talking into our college administrator, our program developers, et cetera, to see if we do have those trainings in place and the technologies that go there. Last but not least, we do work with the School of Business and Economics, trying to figure out what this could potentially mean again to Wyoming's revenue stream in general. How much may it mean? How long could this last? And those kind of variables. And I do not have those answers, and I don't have them on Aaron's cheat sheets either. So if you write those questions, then I'll punt one more time. But yeah, I think that's the exciting piece of some of that research. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Randy, if I could go back to you, can you talk about how a commercial rare earth element project in Wyoming might compete in a global market, specifically with a state-owned company?
Sure. Potentially several different ways, but if you look at the supply chain for the production of rare earth elements and their applications are numerous. So there's lots of opportunity to market a product to global buyers, manufacturers of the product that you're producing, if you're producing the right kind of product. So we have now seen that the United States in particular has now come on board with the transition to electric vehicles. You cannot help notice the enormous uptick in the future demand for electric vehicles and the investments that Ford, that Chevrolet, that Volkswagen, that all of those automobile manufacturers and transportation manufacturers are making to convert to the electric vehicle production. So from our perspective, I think that, yes, we have to be able to compete on costs. And that's a hard thing when you talk about China and its ability to control prices. And there's no doubt, if you've watched their mode of operation over the last 10 years, they have taken the opportunity to drive prices up, and they've taken the opportunity to drive prices down. And what you see is it's not just rare elements that mode is being displayed in. You can see it in the lithium business. You can see it in the cobalt business. You can see it in all of those industries that China intends to dominate well into the next century if they can. And so when you talk about a private company needing to make a $200 to $400 million investment in the state of Wyoming, that company that's willing to do that and its investors have to take a very hard look at whether or not that they can expect the Chinese to take the opportunity once the investment's made to drive prices down. Now, this is a personal opinion. I'm not convinced that the Chinese necessarily have the ability to dictate prices as much as they might have before. They certainly can, but I think the Chinese have been somewhat surprised by the very significant increase in demand as the world goes electric. And even they might have been a bit surprised by that. As you can see from them now importing rare earths into China to serve their own markets for electric vehicle production. It's a good question about how we compete. I think we compete on cost. I think we compete on technology. I think we compete on having the very best people in the industry working for us and innovating. And that's sort of what we've done, even though we're not a producer yet. But I think that's a good path for us looking forward to.
Thank you. Jada, if I could ask you, do you have any advice for Wyoming's elected officials or appointed officials that could help guide them on some steps that might support industry build out in Wyoming?
Yes, I see this as sort of a potentially two-pronged approach, maybe one at the state level and one at the federal level. At the state level, I think it's very important to evaluate the risks associated with the critical mineral supply chain. And it sounds like some of that is already happening, but I think that needs to happen both technically and regulatorily, if that's a word. So at the same time, because assessing just the technological aspects of any development is great, but if we don't have the regulations in place to facilitate that, it can't actually happen. And on top of that, sometimes we enact policy or law that is desired to have one impact, but then downstream has a lot of undesirable impacts that weren't foreseen. And I think if we study policy in tandem with technology and feasibility, we can then prevent that from happening more. So the first step in this sort of state level assessment in my mind would be to mandate a coordinated regulatory assessment. Step one, evaluate risks, including regulatory risks. Step two would be to evaluate the regulatory framework that exists. So some of those regulatory barriers that I already discussed, burdensome regulatory framework and unclear regulatory framework could be two aspects of that. And then finally, step three at the state level would be to, once we understand those barriers and risks, to then identify any modifications in the law and policy that we have to try to eliminate barriers and minimize risks to Wyoming so that we can successfully build out the industry as effectively and efficiently as possible. So that would be my state sort of recommendation. At the federal level, I think that we should broaden feasibility and demonstration studies to include regulatory reform, which I mentioned. I think that we could request, we could push for a request to streamline NEPA for critical minerals, which I think might garner a good deal of support considering the amount of executive and legislative focus we've seen on the critical mineral industry. I also think that we could study the impact of a reformed general mining law in Wyoming. And the reason I say that is some of the most recent proposals to modify the general mining law included royalty and leasing provisions. And I think the impact of those should be studied before we get on board with that or decide that that's not good, to figure out how that would impact the industry here in Wyoming.
Thank you. Fred, if we could talk now a little bit about the unconventional sources for rare earth elements. How do you see these resources being developed in light of the conventional resources that are being developed by rare element resources?
Thanks, Aaron. So a little antagonistic question for my fellow panelists, a little competition. No, all kidding aside, I think that for the best of everybody, they should be pursued concurrently. So quite simply, our nation needs to shore up domestic REE critical mineral resources. And sooner than later. And that's largely because if we don't, we could have pinch points, and the advancements of our energy industry, as Randy mentioned earlier, of our technology industry. And we see that potentially holding back the nation's goals, climate goals, advancement goals. So I think ideally, because I get the chance to answer the question in such a way that they should be concurrent. And if you step a little bit more in for Wyoming, if we could develop technology centers around both unconventional critical mineral resources for extraction, processing, manufacturing, and conventional, and I think that's totally possible. That'd probably be easier for the state in some ways. I think that would also spur advancement for the state. So yeah, ideally we pursue both of these with vigor for the benefit of all.
Thank you. Jada, can you speak to how Wyoming could ensure that the state receives financial benefits from a domestic rare earth element or critical mineral market?
Yes, thank you. I can definitely suggest some ideas, but I think that, as I've mentioned, these should be studied. Some ideas that come to my mind are to enact laws that offer some sort of incentive, such as streamlined permitting or lower taxes for a full supply chain industry to be located within Wyoming. So that would be sourcing, processing, separating, and manufacturing, and that would eliminate some of that China competition. I also think that would be very difficult in a regulatory way, given the barriers that I've discussed. Another idea would be to study the impacts of funding mechanisms like a secondary use tax on sourcing unconventional critical minerals, or a secondary use tax break, depending on which we think economically would incentivize more sourcing from unconventional sources. Another idea would be to create preferential siting practices. So maybe there's expedited permitting for companies that site their facilities near or in coal-based energy communities and who hire a certain percentage of local employees. Along that same vein, we could statutorily require workforce training and prioritization for coal facility workers that are displaced by a coal plant retirement, and offer incentives for hiring a Wyoming workforce. It's really encouraging to hear that the university is already focusing on that specialized job aspect. I think that could be integrated into the legislative efforts.
Thank you. We have a number of great questions from the audience here, and Randy, I think people want to ask you a lot of details about your plant and your processing and things like that. One question that I would like to ask is, someone wondered if you'd received approval of your environmental impact statement, or if you had gotten any pushback on from any environmental groups.
Yeah, let me try to make an important distinction here for everybody. When we first started out on this project 6 to 10 years ago, the focus was on building a commercial plant. And then, as I mentioned, we ran out of money. We found a strategic investor. And for the last 4 years, that investor has been focused on confirming our proprietary separation technology, as well as enhancing it at the Dresden facility in Germany. So there are really two projects that we're talking about. One is the larger scale project where we have to actually mine and build a commercial plant to process it. The second project is the one that we're almost entirely focused on now. And that's to build the demonstration plant. So the demonstration plant, we have identified a relatively modest sized building in an industrial park, private property in Upton. We have also collected a 1,000 ton sample of the high grade material very near the surface back in 2015 from the Bear Lodge resource. That material happens to be stored on private land as well right now. And that material will be the feedstock to the demonstration plant. So from a permitting perspective, even though we were able to move the draft environmental impact statement for the commercial project to the point that we got to, we had to put it on hold because we simply had no more money. And in the interim, the focus has shifted now to the demonstration plant. The demonstration plant also requires permitting and licensing from NRC so that we can go ahead and build and operate that plant. So all of the typical regulatory items that need to be covered are being covered as part of the design of the demonstration plant now. For example, the major difference being that we don't have to do any mining in the forest. The material is sitting there, that 1,000 ton sample is sitting there ready to be transported right down to the plant. So there are no significant permits that are required from the U.S. Forest Service. We've got to transport some of the ore over a little bit of Forest Service land, but nothing significant. The other thing that's important about the demonstration plant is that as we produce product and waste material, we intend to package that up, treat it, package it up, and send it to a licensed storage facility. So there will, at the end of this project, there will be no hangovers from product or waste material at the Upton site. We intend to be able to remove all of that and store it in a safe facility someplace where they do that then. So I think those two items were important to the Department of Energy to be able to commit to do this and do it in a fairly short period of time. One, we've got the ore, we got the material sitting on the ground, private land, ready to go. No mining in the forest, and we're not leaving any waste material at the site when we're done.
Thank you. A little follow-up on that, a question from the audience, and maybe this falls under proprietary, but they're wondering if the separation process can be done without kerosene or ammonia contamination of the waste product.
Proprietary, but what I can say about the process is that as part of the overall design, it will reuse, reclaim many of the materials that are used in the process. So if there are bases or acids that are being used in the process, they will, for the most part, be regenerated in some fashion. And then reused as part of the standard operating process for the plant. With regards to the kerosene and the other reactants, I think it's safe to say that we're very optimistic right now about the ability to reutilize some of that material as part of the process technology as well.
Thank you. Fred, I do have a question as to how do Wyoming's rare earth element deposits compare to those in other states? Are mineable deposits especially prevalent, or is it Wyoming just a more appealing place to mine them?
Well, that is a great question. And to jump right to the end conclusion, we can start singing the Wyoming fight song because we got some world-class REE deposits. So with respect to conventional carbonatites, we have one of the world's nations, not the world's largest, currently unmined, tested, but unmined deposits. That's the Bear Large deposit in Northeast Wyoming, carbonatite. In addition to that, we've been studying the unconventional resources of Wyoming for REEs, which include those wastes associated with mining, such as phosphate mining that has a lot of potential REEs and critical minerals, and coal I mentioned, as well as uranium. We also have a deposit in Wyoming that's sparking some interest here and other places in Wyoming. which is a residual igneous deposit that has allanite as a primary critical mineral deposit holder outside of monazite or bastnasite, which is the carbonatite kind of host for REEs. We do have other critical minerals that are associated in Wyoming with high potential, such as vanadium and some others. But Aaron, you know just as well as I do, we're also limited with respect to some critical minerals. So we probably won't be having a cobalt mining industry in Wyoming, for instance. What we're trying to do now is identify those low-hanging fruits from new cutting-edge prospecting, like the Earth MRI stuff, the survey's leading. Some of the techniques we're working through with Nettle and trying to get that out into the open so that people can make some business decisions.
Thank you. And as a follow-up to that, do you have any thoughts on unconventional rare earth element production from oil and gas?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So some oil and gas deposits are known to selectively enrich certain critical minerals like chrome and nickel. So we're taking a harder look at that. One of the things that we think could be an easy collaboration for the oil and gas industry is actually some of their associated projects. So sometimes they'll have sulfur that's associated with gas production. That would be great for extraction. Also produced waters. So produced waters, of course, if you're going to do metals extraction, one of the key components and potential constraints in Wyoming is the need for large volumes of water. So some of the programs that we're looking at right now at the university is integration there. So maybe some of the low-hanging fruit, first and foremost, for the oil and gas industry are those kinds of assets.
I still haven't figured out how this thing works. Is this working? Oh, okay, permanently on. Okay. Let me comment about the unconventional sources for a minute. The DOE project and our emphasis specifically has been with our process to produce neodymium and praseodymium for the permanent rare earth market. And those will be separated, NdPr separated as part of the process. But we will also be producing concentrates of all of the other heavy and medium rare earth products as we go through that process. And we believe that the technology that we're deploying could be equally applicable to further separating those concentrates, but that's not part of the project right now. But what is interesting, I think, is that these discussions that have been going on up in Wyoming now for 2 or 3 years, probably, on core CM has, at least in my opinion, reached a point where rare element resources ought to be paying a little more attention than we have. Clearly, we've been highly focused on the demonstration plant and our technology. But one of the things about our technology is that it's robust. And even though we call it proprietary, we do not see any major obstacles to being able to feed that plant with alternative sources of feedstock. Now, we've never tested that, so we don't know. But you can imagine some of the issues, such as our feedstock may be 90% total rare earths to the separation plant, as opposed to a product that's being produced or coming from coal feedstocks of some kind. But there may be a good opportunity to collaborate on developing a bridge, if you will, between the coal side and our ability to separate on a more highly concentrated basis.
And I just want to say thanks, Randy. That was one of Dr. Phillips' talking points. So.
Thank you. Jada, I have a question for you, and that is, what externalities such as social, environmental, or economic issues should we consider that we haven't discussed yet today?
That's a good question. I think some of those I discussed in the last question I talked about. So workforce training, the impact to the workforce that will need to happen over time in Wyoming so that we can maintain a Wyoming-based workforce. In addition to that, I think dealing with any sort of wastes that are produced from this process, historically, we haven't done much, I don't think, separation, processing or manufacturing in this country. And I think with the recent passage of the Inflation Reduction Act a couple of weeks ago, that incentivizes, at least for electric vehicles, production of those batteries and vehicles here. So how can we set up Wyoming to facilitate that, but also make sure that the people doing that work are protected? I think that's an element that we can consider. I think there are probably many more that I can't think of off the top of my head, but happy for anyone else to contribute any thoughts as well.
Anyone else? Okay, thanks. I'm not sure who would like to answer this, but the question is, could you go into specifics about what other complementary downstream industries might be attracted to Wyoming by a strong sector of rare earth element production?
I have a thought. It's not very complex though, so feel free to add on. I wanted to say earlier, actually, I think it was a point that Fred brought up. I think as much as we can integrate energy production and sort of cross-cutting resources across energy types, the better. So for instance, using produced water as a source for unconventionally sourced critical minerals, or to clean the water and then use in other processes that are used for energy production, I think is a really interesting idea. I think that principle could be applied across the board as we look at rare earths, as we look at hydrogen, as we look at oil and gas and coal. I think we should be thinking cohesively and not just in these buckets of each type. I think we can be a little bit more cross-cutting.
Yeah, let me try to answer with a couple of other points. Specific to the rare earth supply chain, there are several major steps that, and you may already all know this, but so there's the extraction step where you take it out of the mine, you recover the rare earths in some form, typically a concentrate or something of that fashion, and then you go to separation, and then you have to produce the separated rare earths that are used for downstream applications. So what are the next steps? What we will produce from the demonstration plant is called a rare earth oxide. And that rare earth oxide is not particularly useful in the manufacturing of magnets. It has to be further reduced pyrometallurgically most of the time, although there's some technology that's looking at alternatives. So it has to be reduced, and then it has to be converted into alloy and powders and manufactured into magnets. And so that's a pretty extensive supply chain and there's no real reason why those steps in the supply chain couldn't be located in the state of Wyoming. Of course, once you go to magnets, you really need to look at the further downstream applications, the real value added applications that could be a real game changer for electric vehicle components or military defense issues, whatever the case may be.
All right, so historically, of course, industry's grown up around resource right next door. I think some of the challenges we talked about today with REEs is, it still seems like, how do we get past that extraction jump? Is it time to start courting potential manufacturers? And for the Core CM project specifically, it's certainly one of the things we want to think about and discuss and move forward, because that should be an end game, ideally, at least as we do these studies, to try to figure that out. Why not think of having Upton, Wyoming as the new Detroit for electric cars? If the resource is right there, why not take the moonshot?
Excellent points. Thank you. I have two questions that are sort of related, and Randy, I think these are things you might be able to answer, at least one of them. One is, could you move the project forward faster with no taxes or fees? I think that's probably would be great. But then additionally, the question is, will there be a different royalty rate for different rare earth elements? Would there be a different royalty rate for different rare earth elements?
Well, to be frank, as was introduced, this is a nascent industry. And you're trying to stand up an industry that the United States does not have in its full supply chain. So history tells us that you really don't want to tax that industry to death before it even catches wind. So I think that there will be a time coming, particularly as you look at the opportunities for value-added activities. I mean, taxing the resources is one thing, and everybody's done that to some extent. But I would think that the real opportunity happens to be in the revenue and income being generated from the value-added activities downstream.
Thank you. Any other thoughts along those lines? Okay. Here's one that is sort of thought-provoking, and that is based on the availability of critical minerals in Wyoming, domestically and or globally, is it realistic for society to make a shift towards electric vehicles and a strictly renewable oriented energy industry?
Well, I'll take a shot. So, because everybody else was quiet. So from the geologic standpoint, it is actually resource limited. So we do know there's probably not enough currently REs available to make all the magnets that are necessary for the proposed electric car boom. But as an aside, I have a teenager here closely approaching driving age, and there's a young generation of Americans that don't care about driving either. So it might be hard to, cars cost a lot. They don't want insurance in their Uber, not in Laramie, of course, but in other places. So I don't know how we bounce that out, but just strictly from the geologic standpoint, we know it would be challenging to hit that mark.
I think that it's important on a global scale that we take efforts in that direction. And I think that it's part of the solution. It doesn't necessarily need to be all of the solution. So if geologically we don't have enough, that's a really important note to make as we continue to plan and think about our infrastructure for transportation, for example, and what other technologies do we need to pursue in order to make that happen?
Yeah, I think I would also comment on, I mentioned it earlier, these projections of the demand for electric vehicles over the next 10 or 20 years, and the demand for rare earth elements and magnets are just like that. So I think it's fair to say that there's plenty of room for rare earth producers in the future. And hopefully there will be one in Wyoming at least, and maybe a lot more. But there are plenty of opportunities for domestic production of these to satisfy this growing global demand.
Great, thank you. Fred, super fast question. We're almost out of time. What are you looking at in the Phosphoria Formation?
Oh, what are we looking at in the Phosphoria Formation? Oh, this is interesting. Why the REs accumulate there, but also as the phosphor is being produced, and it's being produced for fertilizers mostly, so ammonia plants. What happens to those REs along the way to be determined? So super fast.
And then one final question. I actually got through all my questions. How can a student interested in rare earth elements for a career get a job in this area?
Well, I guess it's, let me tell you a little bit about the people that we think are going to be working for us at some time in the future. Although this is what I would call a conventional solvent extraction process, the proprietary process, there are enhancements that have been added to it. And to be able to effectively operate and optimize that operation, we have to have really top-notch chemical engineers, engineers of other sorts, and be able to maintain the equipment, modify the equipment as we need to optimize the operations. But this is this will be a technology-driven operation as we go forward with it. And optimization of it is going to take some very good people, students who have focused on the types of careers that provide for that as an opportunity. And I'm sure that's being focused on at the University of Wyoming as well. And in some ways, you know, it's part of the diversifying picture that we paint with regards to rare element resources development in the state of Wyoming. Will be the opportunities for some of those top quality folks in those programs to find a home and stay home.
Thank you so much. I really want to have a huge thank you to our panelists for sharing their expertise and perspective today. And a thank you to the audience for your excellent questions and attention. And a huge thank you to the Wold Foundation and the Wold family for making this possible, and to the School of Energy Resources for making it happen. Thank you very much.